No project of its kind had ever been undertaken on such a massive scale. Stretching across a body of water with depths up to 300 feet, winds gusting upwards of 60 miles per hour, along with the constant navigational hazard of fog, the gate itself was a mile wide, causing many to believe such a feat was not possible. The project required the advertisement skills of Joseph Strauss, the mathematical genius of Charles Ellis, and the management expertise of Russell Cohn. But more importantly, a project of this magnitude depended on the hard work and dedication of its workers. A high-risk job such as this required that the rights of workers be acknowledged. This proved paramount in construction of the modern wonder that is the Golden Gate Bridge. A project of this size required hundreds of men. When construction began in 1933, national unemployment was 25%. It was not difficult to find willing men, but the city of San Francisco did not have many available ironworkers, the most needed position on the job. Wages, averaging to what is now $134 a day, were offered, and men with no previous experience in high steel construction flocked from across the country to satisfy the labor shortage. Farm boys, truck drivers, and everyone in between soon arrived in the city to find work on the bridge. As part of the New Deal, many development and construction projects were undertaken by the federal government to increase employment and stimulate the economy. Some of the projects included the Oversea Highway in Key West, Florida, the many projects as part of the Tennessee Valley Authority, along with Boulder Dam, begun under President Hoover and taken over by the Works Progress Administration under FDR. The Oakland Bay Bridge, being constructed at the same time, even received federal funds. The Golden Gate Bridge was different to all these projects, however. It received no financial support from the federal government whatsoever, making its self-generated dedication to the ironworkers all the more incredible. In a time when high steel construction had few safety standards, the Golden Gate project featured many firsts. Ironworkers were required to wear safety lines and harnesses, and every man on the job had to wear a hard hat. To combat dizziness and hangovers, workers were given sauerkraut juice. All these measures were previously unheard of on any job site, but the workers refused to do such dangerous and life-threatening work without them. The main advocate of workers' rights on the project was Ironworkers Local 377. Every worker on the Golden Gate project belonged to Local 377. It was a closed shop. One of the first demands made by the workers was an end to the shape-up system of hiring. With this method, little consideration was given to skills. Instead, men were lined up and examined like cattle at an auction. Collective bargaining proved to be a pivotal chip in favor of the workers, allowing Local 377 to bring an end to the shape-up system of hiring. While the majority of bridge construction occurred after the passage of the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act, it is worth noting that from the very beginning, the project had the strong influence of unions. The Wagner Act reaffirmed the right of collective bargaining for all workers, and it outlawed company unions and blacklisting. This act only served to further strengthen the importance of labor representation on the project. As the steel towers rose to their total 745 feet, riveters began losing teeth and hair, while others became disoriented. Chemists found that the lead primer paint of the steel evaporated upon contact with the white-hot rivets. These fumes were inhaled by riveters, and soon respirators became another protective measure. While the Union enforced safety devices, it was Chief Engineer Joseph Strauss who implemented the most significant worker safety measure. In June 1936, when construction of the roadway began, $130,000 was spent on a safety net. Stretching 10 feet out on either side of the roadway, it was sure to protect any worker from falling to their death. Strauss's motivation for installing such an elaborate safety device has been debated since the time it was hung under the bridge. The most logical reason was the chief engineer's goal of completing the project with minimum fatalities. At the time, it was commonly accepted in bridge construction that for every $1 million spent, there would be one death. The San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, being constructed at the same time, had already experienced 22 deaths by 1935, to the Golden Gate's one, a Kermit Moore who was crushed by a falling beam. Strauss was committed to beating the odds, if only for his own glory. Either way, it certainly served the interests of the dedicated workers who built the bridge. In all, 19 workers were saved by the net. In time, they became members of what has become known as the Halfway to Hell Club. One of the first to join this exclusive club was Al Zampa, a career ironworker who had worked on several bridges before joining the Golden Gate Project. On October 20th, 1936, Zampa slipped off a stringer and fell into the net. The part of the net he fell into was suspended over the Marne shore. To absorb the shock of falling, the net was tied with some slack, but where Zampa fell, it was only 10 feet over the shore, and he landed on the rocky ground with 4 broken vertebrae. This was unusual, however, and the other 18 members of the Halfway to Hell Club walked away only slightly bruised. Unfortunately, the odds could not be beat. On February 17, 1937, tragedy struck when 12 workers plummeted into the freezing waters of the Pacific Ocean. The accident was due to a faulty bracket on one of the scaffolds under the roadway. That morning, inspectors had been on the scaffolds on the San Francisco end of the bridge. One safety inspector noted that it was unsafe, but on the other end of the bridge, towards the Marin shore, work had already begun for the day. Slim Lambert and 11 other workers were stripping the wood forms from the underside of the concrete roadway when the sound of ripping metal broke the calm morning air. In a flash, the brackets holding the scaffold to the bridge broke loose, and all 12 of the workers fell into the net. The 11-ton scaffold followed, and soon the net ripped away with 10 of the workers tangled within. Slim Lambert had fallen into the net headfirst, and as it slipped into the sea, he desperately positioned himself with his feet toward the water. The weight of the scaffold pulled the net and the workers below the surface, but Lambert managed to break free. When he surfaced, he found Fred DeMatson, one of the workers who had been on the scaffold, floating unconscious. DeMatson and 9 others did not survive the accident. Lambert suffered numerous broken bones but survived, while another worker, Tom Casey, dangled from a beam under the roadway until he could be lifted to safety. This accident proved to be the greatest sacrifice made by the men who built the Golden Gate Bridge. On April 19, 1937, the bridge was complete after 52 months of back-breaking work. When visitors look upon the bridge today, it harkens back to a time when labor rights were respected, and it was the expected responsibility for employers to negotiate with unions. Currently, there is less and less of that. Oftentimes, groundbreaking legislation, such as the Wagner Act, is ignored in the interests of business. Collective bargaining, which ensured that fair hiring practices were used and livable wages were earned, has taken a back seat in the last decade. Many ask if a project like the Golden Gate Bridge can be undertaken today, not only because of the engineering challenge, but also the challenge of taking on the responsibility to workers. Today, the Golden Gate Bridge is recognized by many as a modern wonder of engineering, but too often the men who built the bridge are forgotten. In a time without government-imposed safety standards on construction sites, the Golden Gate Project took unprecedented steps to provide a safe work environment for ironworkers. In the depths of the Great Depression, the Golden Gate Project offered hundreds of men jobs with exceedingly fair wages. The construction of the Golden Gate is certainly a shining example of employer responsibility and employee rights.